In the opulent halls of the mighty Habsburg dynasty, the most powerful royal bloodline in 16th century Europe, a young girl was born beneath the weight of 1,000 expectations. From the moment Maria Anna took her first breath, she was not seen as a daughter, not as a child, but as a thread in a grand dynastic tapestry. Her future had already been inked onto scrolls in court chambers. Sealed not with love, but with duty. She would never belong to herself. Maria Anna of Spain, daughter of King Philip III and Queen Margaret of Austria, grew up not with fairy tales and freedom, but under the iron ritual of royal training. At 8, she was taught the weight of royal silk and how to walk as if the world belonged beneath her. At 12, she began studying diplomatic poetry, religious doctrine, and the political faces she would one day be forced to smile for. Love. That word did not exist in her vocabulary. It was replaced by obedience. And then, just as her heart had begun to awaken with the tender hopes of a girl becoming a woman, it was silenced. At 15, her marriage was declared, not by her, but for her, to her own brother, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria. There were no questions, no protest, only nods, signatures, and a wedding date. For the Habsburgs, purity of blood was sacred. To maintain the dynasty's grip on Europe, they would wed brother to sister, cousin to cousin, turning royal hearts into chess, pieces on a board stained with power. Maria Anna had no voice in this. The soft whisper of doubt in her soul was drowned by choirs of court approval. She didn't love Ferdinand. She barely knew him. But love was not required of queens-to-be, only loyalty. And so she sat, dressed in white, not in joy but in silence, as her childhood ended beneath the crushing gold crown of empire. That day, the palace doors closed on her innocence forever. Behind them, she was no longer Maria Anna the girl. She became Maria Anna the bride of her own blood. The wedding was not a celebration. It was a transaction, cloaked in velvet and silence. Maria Anna, now bound to her brother by parchment and protocol, did not walk toward him out of desire, but out of duty, her steps echoing across the cold marble floor like the tolling of a slow, inevitable bell. The chapel was draped in gold and crimson, but no color could soften the suffocating weight of what was being asked of her. Archduke Ferdinand stood still at the altar, more statue than man, dressed in his black doublet and ceremonial sash, regal, unreadable, and far too familiar. Behind them loomed saints and angels carved in stone, but none would descend to intervene. She stood there, hands trembling beneath her gloves. As words were spoken over her life like a spell, her mother did not cry. Her father did not smile. The guests, cloaked in centuries of tradition, watched in pious silence as this pale, young girl vowed herself to the bloodline that had already claimed her innocence. When the vows were complete and the rings exchanged, the silence in her chest was louder than the organ. That night, Maria Anna did not return to her childhood bed, nor did she sleep. She sat by the window of a strange room, gazing at the moon through tearless eyes, feeling as though she had died and been buried beneath layers of silk and dynasty. The gown she wore had once belonged to a queen long dead, a woman who, like her, had been handed to a relative. Praised for her loyalty and remembered only for her blood. In that moment, Maria Anna understood what it meant to disappear while still breathing. She would carry the name of wife, sister, and empress in training, but never again would she carry the name of girl. The palace halls would still echo with her steps, but they would not belong to her. She would walk as a ghost of herself, draped in elegance, bound by obedience and crowned not with love, but with a lineage that devoured its daughters to feed the empire's name. The years that followed were not marked by seasons or joys, but by heirs and funerals. Maria Anna, now empress-to-be, had fulfilled the most sacred duty of her lineage. She bore children, one after another, with the quiet ache of a woman who knew her womb was not hers. The palace midwives whispered of fragile lungs and sunken eyes, of infants too quiet to cry, and others who never opened theirs at all. The blood that was supposed to be sacred was turning against itself, folding like broken glass under the weight of its own purity. With each birth, Maria Anna felt less like a mother, and more like a vessel, an altar upon which the dynasty sacrificed its own. And still, the court praised her. They called her loyal, called her noble, never once daring to name the sorrow that lived in the folds of her silks or the stiffness in her spine. Her children, those who lived, were pale and delicate, bearing the signs of a gene pool, Twisted by centuries of closed doors and locked marriages, doctors came and went in hushed urgency, their eyes downcast, their cures ineffectual. Ferdinand, now emperor, remained stoic and distant, more concerned with maps and ministers than with the quiet rot devouring their offspring. Maria Anna, who had once dreamed of writing poetry or dancing in the garden alone, now spent her days beside a cradle and her nights beside a coffin. The palace hall still echoed with her footsteps, but now even the shadows turned away. Her face, once bright with restrained hope, was etched with sorrow that no crown could conceal. She had become a living relic of the empire's arrogance, a monument to loyalty, carved in flesh and sorrow. No one asked her what it meant to watch a bloodline destroy its own children in pursuit of immortality. No one dared. She stood silent, dressed in velvet and grief, surrounded by portraits of dead queens who had suffered the same. And in the stillness of her chambers, Maria Anna finally understood. The curse of royalty was not war or betrayal. It was obedience without love, sacrifice without meaning, and motherhood without joy. Time, like the cold marble beneath her feet, stretched on in silence. The children grew, those few who had survived, but they were pale. Mirrors of the empire's decay, brittle in body and wary in spirit. Maria Anna watched them with a sorrow that had no name, a grief that hovered quietly behind every royal gesture she performed. Her eldest son spoke in whispers and walked with trembling hands. Her second daughter never learned to smile. The court looked away, praising the children's delicate refinement, refusing to acknowledge the rot beneath their silk and lace. Maria Anna continued to perform her role, her spine upright beneath layers of brocade and velvet, her voice measured and soft, never rising above what was proper. The mirrors in her chambers, once trimmed with gold and carved cherubs, now held a face she no longer recognized. Woman who had once dreamed of gardens and poetry, now lost in a tangle of titles, airs and rituals. Her days blurred into processions, banquets, christenings, and funerals. Even laughter had left the palace halls, replaced by the echoes of footsteps and the rustling of documents that dictated the next ceremonial obligation. She spoke little, for there was no room in royalty for vulnerability. Behind closed doors, her hands trembled more than ever, and she took to writing letters never sent, confessions meant only for the fire. She wrote of her loneliness, of the babies she buried without names, of the nights she wished to disappear beneath the weight of her crown. But even in these silent admissions, she never once allowed herself to break. She was, after all, the empress. Her pain was meant to be noble. Her tears were meant to be invisible. And though her body remained in the palace, her soul had wandered to quieter places, fields she'd never walked, books she'd never read, a life that might have been hers, if only she had been born without a title. Yet the world would never know. This version of Maria Anna, they would remember the crown, the posture, the bloodline, but not the girl who once existed beneath it all. Years turned to decades, and Maria Anna aged not with grace, but with the quiet erosion of a woman who had never lived for herself. The mirror no longer lied. Her once youthful face now carried the weary cracks of endurance, not time. Her days were slower now, not freer, each step echoing through the vast marble halls, like the final ticks of a clock that had counted down her life and obligations. The empire still stood, decorated with flags, upheld by titles. But beneath its golden sheen, the bloodline she had preserved was fraying at the seams. Her children, now grown, carried the same haunted eyes. The physicians still came in silence. The priests still whispered of duty, and the court still bowed, never knowing that the empress they revered was already a shadow. She sat longer by the windows, watching seasons she never felt. She reread letters she had never sent, their edges soft and yellowed, confessions to a world that would never hear her truth. In the end, there was no grand final moment, no rebellion, no escape, just silence. When she died, the bells rang across the capital in triumphant mourning. Poets praised her loyalty. Historians chronicled her legacy. Portraits were commissioned, tapestries woven. But none of them showed the girl who once dreamed of writing her own story. None of them showed the empress who carried the weight of a kingdom in her womb and the burden of silence in her soul. Maria Anna was remembered, yes, but only as the role she played, never as the woman she was. And in that way, even in death, the crown still owned her.